and a very warm welcome to this week's edition of the WION-VOA CO-Production. I'm Molly Gambhir. United States President Joe Biden condemned Russia's unprovoked and unjustified military attack on Ukraine and launched another round of sanctions against Moscow. Voice of America's chief White House correspondent Patsy Widakuswara getting us this report.
Sirens in Kiev as Russian President Vladimir Putin launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, unleashing airstrikes and ground troops across the border. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called on citizens to take up arms. Thursday morning, he spoke with U.S. President Joe Biden, who coordinated with G7 leaders to roll out fresh sanctions against Moscow.
We've already seen the impact of our actions on Russia's currency and the ruble, which early today hit its weakest level ever in history. The Russia stock market plunged today. The Russian government borrowing rate spiked by over 15%.
The latest package includes sanctions on more Russian elites, debt and equity restrictions on 13 Russian enterprises, limiting exports of U.S. technology to Russian military, and sanctions on Russia's major financial institutions.
The two largest state banks, Sberbank and VTB, those two banks are two of the most core and large and systemic in the Russian financial system. So I think it's incredibly important that those two banks handling a majority of the dollar transactions in the country were actually subject to sanctions.
Sanctions were also slapped on Belarus, a Kremlin ally that has held joint military drills with Russia to pressure Ukraine. U.S. and allies did not move to kick Moscow out of the SWIFT banking system, a critical financial network that connects thousands of banks around the world. Nor did they sanction Putin personally, but those options remain on the table. 69% of Americans support additional sanctions on Russia, according to a Reuters Ipsos poll. But 62% oppose sending U.S. troops to defend Ukraine, which Biden repeatedly said he would not do.
No matter how unrealistic Western leaders might have thought it would be to protect Ukraine using direct military force, there was no need to advertise the fact that they were not willing to do so.
On Thursday, the U.S. sent 7,000 troops to Germany to help reassure NATO allies, in addition to the thousands recently deployed to Poland and Romania. Meanwhile, more than 100 NATO warplanes and over 150,000 troops have been put on high alert. NATO leaders are meeting virtually Friday to map out their next steps. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News, Washington.
And to get in further details and perspectives, joining us on the broadcast is Voice of America correspondent Chris Casqueo in Washington. Thanks very much, Chris, for being here with us. United States President Joe Biden has detailed that new round of sanctions against Russia. Where does the U.S. Congress stand with any further measures that it could take against Russia?
Good morning from Washington, D.C., Molly. U.S. lawmakers have struggled to reach an agreement on sanctions legislation. Republicans favored triggering sanctions earlier in an attempt to deter Putin, but Democrats favored the Biden administration approach of working in concert with the European allies to negotiate a diplomatic solution. But now that a full-scale Russian invasion has begun, there are several options at the disposal of lawmakers, including $750 million in aid for Ukraine in the 2022 spending bill and as much as $1 billion in humanitarian aid. The U.S. Congress is on recess this week and is not set to return to Washington until Monday, but lawmakers received an unclassified phone briefing from White House administration officials on Thursday.
Right. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is upending decades of political order in Europe. What have the experts been saying about the possibility of the conflict expanding? What is the view at this point?
Well, experts say that answer depends on what Russian leader Vladimir Putin decides to do. For example, if NATO is forced to invoke Article 5 by a Russian attack on the Baltic republics, Poland, or other alliance members, then experts say we're closer to the outset of a possible World War III, but they say that's still pretty unlikely. They say it's more likely that we're at the outset of a second Cold War. One expert says Putin's invasion may well signal the death knell of the post-World War II global order and the rise of a global alliance with Russia, China, and Iran, undeterred by rule of law and laser focused on cracks in the Western alliance system.
A new polling indicating a majority of Americans see the Russia-Ukraine situation as a threat to U.S. interests. Can you share with us some of the other findings?
Sure, Molly. First, it's important to note that this poll from Gallup was conducted before Russia invaded Ukraine, but here are some of the findings. Before the invasion, amid rising tensions between Russia and the West, 52% of Americans see the conflict between Russia and Ukraine as a critical threat to vital U.S. interests. That's a change from 2015 after Russia annexed the Crimean Peninsula, when fewer than half of U.S. adults, 44%, thought it posed that serious a threat. But when they were asked separately about the broader threat Russia's military power poses to U.S. vital interests, an even higher percentage, 59%, consider that to be a critical threat. That is up from 44% a year ago and is the highest Gallup has recorded since the item was first asked in 2004. Overall, 85% of Americans now view Russia unfavorably. That's an 8 percentage point increase in unfavorable ratings from last year and is Russia's worst rating in more than 3 decades. But Americans are split on how well the mutual defense Western military alliance NATO is doing its job. 48% say it's doing a good job, while 45% say it's doing a poor job. Molly?
Chris Casqueo getting us those details from Washington. Thanks very much for the moment. And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of the WION VOA co-production.